Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our number 18 meeting, November 7, 2024. I would like to begin by acknowledging that this meeting is being held on an unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The people of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation has lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. This morning, just wanna acknowledge and want to thank all my colleagues and all city staff and the resident in the rural area that they participated in the Rural Summit. We're not going to talk much about it at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to leave it to the end because we have a motion. And I'm going to give an opportunity also to my colleague to say a few words about it. So when the time comes. In the meantime, I'll ask Kelly to do a roll call, please.
Councillor Brown?
Here.
Councillor Kitts?
Here.
Councillor Luloff?
Present.
Vice Chair Kelly?
Present.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. This was a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as item 4.2 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those specifically identified in the Planning Act who make an oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendment are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on November 13, 2024, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Any declaration of interest? Seeing none. 3.1, ERAC minutes 17, Thursday, October 3rd. Can I have a confirmation on the minute?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Great. 4.1 is amendment to site plan control bylaw to comply with legislative changes to the Planning Act. There is no presentation, no delegation, no correspondence. Jacob, our staff, Jacob Seltiel is here for if anybody has a question on it. And if there is no question or things, we have a recommendation that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee recommend Council approve the amendments to site plan control bylaw 2014-256 as shown in document 1. Is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. We're going to hold 4.2 because I asked Jacob to give us a little presentations concerning the delegated authority for minor rezoning. And if you have questions, we can at least at that time we can ask them. 4.3 program grant application review, and we have our staff Ryan Thompson here. The recommendation that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the recommendation on the Rural Committee Building Grant Program applications as detailed in document 1. Anybody have a question or?
All good and Osgood, Chair.
All good and Osgood. Is that carried?
Carried.
And thank you very much, Ryan, for working with the community. I know it was time sensitive for both of them, so. We have no in-camera item for this meeting. I'm gonna go to the IPDs. 6.1, Rideau Valley Conservation Authority Reserve appointment. Is that good? Received? Good.
Received.
And 6.2, the normal farm practices. I want to thank Dr. Stowe and Will McDonald, and there will be no changes, so there is no concern or anything. So status quo, is that received?
Received.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll go back to 4.2. And I'll ask Jacob to come, and Royce is with them too, sorry. Welcome both of you here, and then we'll give you as much as time as you want, and then we'll take question after the presentation. Just before you start the presentation, I also want to welcome two of my colleagues, my council colleague. I saw Lane just pulled in. I didn't want to say hi to Councilor Sean Devine before I see you because you were out when we started, but we want to welcome you and thank you very much for being here with us this morning. And Councilor Devine also, Sean Devine, being here with us today. Thank you. You go ahead if you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public. My name is Jacob Saltiel, and I'll be delivering this report today on behalf of Planning Policy. Today's report is Delegated Authority for Minor Rezoning. Next slide, please. This is the overview for today's report. We'll be talking about the purpose, the legislative context that enables these changes, the proposed changes to the criteria for minor rezoning from the current criteria for minor rezoning that exist in our city processes, as well as the new process for delegated authority for minor rezoning. Next slide, please. The purpose of this project is to delegate rezoning applications to staff that meet the criteria of minor to be processed under delegated authority with ward councillor concurrence. And I'll elaborate on that process later in this presentation. The proposed implementation date of this project is January 1st, 2025. Next slide, please. The legislative context for this project is that until the Supporting Businesses and People Act of 2021, municipalities could not delegate rezoning applications to staff for decision. After that legislation came into effect, the new Section 39.2 of the Planning Act specified that if a municipality put in its official plan what rezoning applications are considered minor, those could be delegated to staff for decision. Therefore, we need to amend our official plan to make this project work, and we need to specify what is considered minor in that OPA that is before you today. In addition to implement this process, we also need to amend related bylaws, including the planning fees bylaw, where our current definition of minor rezoning sits, as well as the delegation of authority bylaw and the public notification policy. In terms of council direction, phase 2 of the Bill 109 implementation report directed staff to develop criteria for minor rezonings, which is what is before you today, as well as this is fulfilling a requirement, a condition of the Housing Fund Accelerator Agreement to streamline planning applications. Next slide, please. The current criteria for minor rezoning includes performance regulations that would be to do with height, setbacks, numbers in the zoning bylaw, as well as other technical modifications, including temporary rezonings, conditions of severance, et cetera. In order to adapt those criteria to this process, staff propose adding a new maximum height threshold to performance regulations to be considered a minor rezoning. There are parts of the city where the only height maximum is in the official plan or if there's no secondary plan in effect. And the current criteria would allow an applicant to ask for any amount of height to be considered as a minor rezoning. Therefore, staff propose a new threshold for height as part of this process. So for those properties that are within a neighborhood designation or the evolving overlay, the maximum height that could be asked for would be up to 3 stories in total. So that's not 3 stories in addition, that would be up to a 3-story building or up to 4 stories within the evolving overlay. Otherwise, the calculation will be the lesser of 5 stories or 50 meters or 25% of the permitted building height rounded down to the nearest half meter. And on the next slide, I will be showing a chart of what that looks like in practice. Finally, and most specific to this committee, we'll also be clarifying that a surplus farm dwelling severance would be a minor rezoning delegated to staff for decision. Next slide, please. This chart shows the formula of up to 5 stories or 15 meters or 25% of the permitted building height. Starting on the left-hand side, this shows the permitted height in the zone, and the right-hand side shows how much height could be asked for to be considered a minor rezoning. And to clarify, this is not what staff would necessarily approve. It's just what an applicant could request to fit in that criteria of minor rezoning. Of course, as with all rezoning applications, the approval will be based on conformity with other city policies, such as the official plan, any applicable secondary plan, as well as the existing and plan context and any applicable guidelines. So on the left-hand side of this chart, moving from the top to the bottom, 8.5 meters represents the lowest height maximum that we have in most of our residential zones. And at the bottom, we have 60 meters. which is the switchover point, at which point up to 5 stories could be requested. So if you look on the right-hand side of the chart, it shows that in the low-rise residential zones, you could ask for up to 2 meters. And then if you go down to a zone that permits up to 20 stories and taller than that, which is not shown on this chart, you could ask for up to 5 stories to be considered a minor rezoning. But in all cases, the maximum that you could possibly get is up to 5 stories to be considered a minor rezoning. Next slide, please. This next slide shows how this works in the neighborhood designation. Essentially what it means is you could get a taller version of what's permitted in the zone, but you could not add more stories than what is permitted in that designation. So for a 3-story building, you could add 2 meters to it. For a 10.5 meter building, that would be 3 stories, but you could not add another story to become a 4-story building. And something that to clarify as well is residential typologies cannot be added through minor rezonings. So if the zone does not already permit, for example, townhouses or low-rise apartment buildings, the additional height would not enable adding those typologies to those zones where they're not already permitted. Next slide, please. This next slide shows how this works in the evolving overlay. Similarly, if your permitted height is 8.5 meters, you could add up to 2 meters to get to 3 stories, but you would need a minimum of 9.6 meters as your maximum height to be able to add that 4th story. I'll turn now to the process for delegated authority for minor rezoning. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, there's a ward councillor concurrence mechanism for this process. The left-hand side of this chart shows how this would work, where ward councillor concurrence has been granted. The right-hand side shows what would happen if delegated authority is withdrawn. So the first 3 steps are similar in both situations. The application is submitted. We are proposing an abbreviated circulation and public comment period of 14 days instead of 28. This would align with our current requirement for site plan control. And after issue resolution, when staff are ready to make a decision, they would prepare a delegated authority report with the draft bylaw to be sent to the ward councillor for their review. The ward councillor would be given 7 days to review that report and the draft bylaw and grant their concurrence. If planning staff do not hear back from the councillor within those 7 days, they would follow up with them to ensure that there is a decision that has been made. Where ward councillor concurrence has been obtained, that bylaw would then be submitted to the next bulk consent agenda, meaning that there is no requirement for a public meeting at that point. If there's a staff refusal, then this would go through the normal process under our public notification policy and be put on the next applicable agenda, in this case, Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee. On the right-hand side, I'll explain how this works when ward councillor concurrence is not obtained. So the first 3 steps are the same. If the ward councillor does not grant concurrence, then that would have to go through the normal process for a rezoning report and would be put on the next applicable committee agenda and through the normal council process. Pending any questions from this committee or members of the public, this concludes my presentation for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and great clear explanation. So we appreciate that. Any question from my team? We seeing none. Appreciate it and thank you. We're looking forward for those changes and every time to improve and to make the process easier and fluid and better to the resident and whatever who's applying. It's very good news for us. So thank you and thank you, Royce, for the hard work and what you've been doing on this file. So we appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. The Agricultural Affairs Committee recommend council 1, approve the amendment to the official plan of the City of Ottawa attached as document 1 to this report and proposed to be effective on January 1st, 2025. 2, approve the amendment to the planning fees bylaw attached as document 2 to this report and proposed to be effective on January 1st, 2025. 3, approve the amendments to the delegate authority bylaw attached as document 3 to the report and proposed to be effective on January 1st, 2025. And 4, approve the amendments to the public notification and consultation policy attached as document 4 to this report and proposed to be effective on January 1st, 2025. And 5, that the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee approve the consultation details section of this report. Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. We're going to go back to number 7. We have no open mic. And then number 8, we're gonna deal with 8.1, motion from Councillor Brown. I ask Councillor Brown to bring his motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In the interest of saving some time, I'll just read the therefore be it resolved clauses. Therefore be it resolved that given the context of the corridor, the McBean Street resurfacing project scope of work be limited to widening the sidewalks and resurfacing the roadway. And be it further resolved that the McBean Street cycling project be removed from the 2023 Transportation Master Plan, Active Transportation Project List, and the 2024 Provisional DC Background Study, resulting in removal of DC funding for the cycling project. Mr. Chair, I appreciate your time and our colleagues' time in allowing me to bring this forward. I've been working with staff for over a year on this particular item, and I'm pleased to see the motion come forward today as it's been read into the record. In conversation with my community associations, residents and businesses on McBean Street, removing parking from one side didn't fit the context of the rural village and certainly would have impacted our businesses, the schools, the churches on the main street. I don't think this committee has anything wrong with bike lanes. We're not opposed to them in the right context. And in this case, I don't think that context was satisfied. So happy to answer any questions from our colleagues that you may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I appreciate you presenting, but we also have technical motion. I ask Vice Chair Kelly to present the technical amendment, and we do have staff to answer any questions. I think Jennifer Armstrong is here. And maybe you just want to get yourself ready, prepared for some questions. And I'll ask Councillor Clark Kelly to read the technical motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Whereas Councillor Brown tabled the notice of motion titled amending the scope of the McBean Street resurfacing project at the October 3rd, 2024 Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee meeting. And whereas implications for planning, development and building services were not available at the time of publication, therefore be it resolved that the departmental implications section be amended to include the attached comment from planning, development and building services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly, but we'll vote about it after, but we have a question now. If you have a question, just click on the button. Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you so much. So I actually have two series of questions about this, and they're more of a general nature. The first is relating to sort of process with the TMP and how this came to pass. So am I to understand that the Complete Streets policy triggered, when this road was up for resurfacing, triggered the installation of the bike lanes on McBean?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So there's actually two mechanisms. This project was included in the active transportation project list that was approved as part of Part 1 of the Transportation Master Plan in 2023, but then also through our Complete Streets policy when roads are scheduled for renewal or resurfacing. There we do look for opportunities to provide improvements to active transportation at that time as well, within the scope of the undertaking.
Yeah, so I think I had a similar situation in my ward last year with Fitzgerald, where, you know, it was listed in the new TMP Part 1, but actually advanced a lot more quickly because the street was ready to be come together. Design could come together quickly. So in the prioritization process, the weight of like the economics of it, does that sort of zoom along the other ways that a project would be prioritized?
So certainly the coordination opportunities are a key consideration on the timing. If there's an opportunity to go in and provide that project as part of another project that's being undertaken, and there's cost savings associated with that, then that would be an opportunity to advance the timing of that project, to be able to stretch our active transportation budgets as far as we can.
Certainly, I would be interested in stretching all budgets as much as we can, but I do wonder, you know, how does that then relate to, you know, mode share targets that are also part of how we're going to prioritize various projects through the TMP? Like, is there a sequential nature to how we're trying to move people through our city differently? Because I understand maybe that this money would go back into the pot if it wasn't used in the village. Certainly in my ward, I'm working very hard to try and support people to get out of their cars potentially, so that those that have to drive farther aren't congested by residents of College Ward. So I am attracted to the idea of getting the money back to some projects that have, you know, higher numbers, populations, and perhaps greater mode share targets. So how does all that relate to each other?
So the prioritization criteria, we're stepping back a minute. We are, as part of the next phase of the Transportation Master Plan, we'll be bringing forward the priorities of the projects that were identified in part one of the Transportation Master Plan. And there are criteria that are being looked at, and that information will be shared with the public early in 2025. But generally speaking, you know, we're looking at opportunities to improve safety and connectivity. Also opportunities where we know that there's significant potential to increase mode share. You know, many considerations that sort of go into that. And in terms of the overall, you know, how those projects overall contribute to a mode change in cycling, I think we're really focused on connecting the network and really investing where it makes the most sense throughout the city. So we're not focusing just on the downtown, we're not focusing just on the suburbs, but looking throughout the city, because we will be, again, as part of the next phase of the Transportation Master Plan, setting mode share targets for different areas of the city that respect the context of those areas and how people are traveling in those areas today, and how we might be able to push the needle in terms of shifting to more sustainable travel modes in the future going forward. So we're looking to do that throughout the city.
So, and I'm sorry, we were in meetings all this week, so I didn't get a chance to do this, you know, behind the scenes. But so what would be the implications then of within the motion, you know, let's say supporting the first, therefore be it resolved, but what does the second, therefore be it resolved mean when you take it out of the TMP project altogether?
So if it's not part of the TMP project list, that would mean that staff would not consider opportunities for implementing that project until the next time the TMP project list was reviewed. And then, you know, certainly at that time, there could be an opportunity to add it back on or not, again, based on the consultation and analysis work that was done at that time. Again, though, through our complete street lens, if there was future resurfacing or whatnot, that's another opportunity where it could be looked at again to see if there was opportunity. So it's, but when it's removed from the TMP list, it basically means we wouldn't be looking at it as a standalone project.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Devine.
Thank you. My questions are just so I'm just going to turn my head sideways. And I appreciate being able to have the conversation here, because I know that, you know, this is going to rise to council and I want to just have a better informed decision when we get there. And I appreciate the conversation, the questions from my colleague about trying to get, you know, economies of budget here. I guess I just want to talk about, I want to ask questions about the implications of removal of this project from the TMP. So I was grateful to read the amendment to the report, the departmental implications, because that provided the kind of context information that I was trying to understand. Now, I have not been to this street, but I love Google Maps, and I spent some time on Google Maps last night looking at it. As I understand it correctly, and at least this is what I saw, as you go northward on McBean from the Jock River, there's a wide sidewalk on the bridge. And then once you get off that wide sidewalk, there is a brief continuation of a bike lane. I think I saw that it kind of just stops in the middle of nowhere. If this project were to go forward, would that bike lane continue from where it ends to, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the road, but about 2 or 3 blocks up right before you get to the school?
So as described in the departmental response, we looked at sort of been working with the councillors, some options to reduce the impact on parking. And so the departmental response speaks to the scaled back solution that staff had developed. And so that would involve adding cycling lanes on the south section of the corridor, connecting from the bridge to the school. And then there would not be any cycling facilities on the north end of the corridor, and all parking in that section would be maintained.
Yes, and I guess what I meant, in that south end of the corridor, once you get off the bridge, I believe I saw that there is what looks like a painted bike lane, and that this would be a continuation of that until you get to the end of that sector?
Yes, there'd be a continuous facility to the end for that segment.
Okay. And to address the issue of parking, because I've had similar concerns about lanes taking away from parking, as I understand it, from the departmental implications, you did a local area study, and that the addition of the cycling lanes as proposed would still leave enough parking based on current demand. Is that correct?
Correct, based on the parking utilization study that was carried out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and Councillor Brown. You have a comment?
Thank you very much. With regards to the staff response, and I appreciate that something needs to come forward. I don't think the staff response, Mr. Chair, is encompassing of 7 days a week. When I spoke to my community association, the impacted residents along the street and the businesses, losing any parking would be challenging, given that the city in the last couple of years rezoned this part of the village to be the village core. So we would have the flexibility to change some of these residential dwellings into businesses. One great one that's recently come online is the Richmond Bakery. More than 2,000 people on its first day. They all parked, nobody biked. I can appreciate that there may be some demand, but the village of Richmond is more than 200 years old. We've survived up until now without a bike lane down the main street. I'm confident we will do well into the future. We are expanding the widths of the sidewalks to ensure that those who wish to walk down the main street have that opportunity to do so. There's a large story to be told here, and it's challenging to do when you only come out for a few hours on one day. So I appreciate the comments. I think this is great. This is the kind of feedback we're looking to see. I appreciate staff coming back and working on this with me to reflect the vision that the residents in the Village of Richmond want to see, even if it's not in line with what the City of Ottawa's policy says on the matter. But this is why we have local councillors who live in the villages, and we have a Rural Affairs Committee to address these kind of concerns. So thank you very much to staff and to your time and the committee's time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Kidd.
Sorry, Councillor Brown, I didn't mean to go after your wrap up, but I just wanted to make a comment. You know, we had the Rural Summit. We talked a lot about one size fits all, or one size doesn't fit all. And often you hear us as rural councillors saying it's really hard to compete with getting investment in rural areas based on the criteria that's set out, and we're kind of fighting against the urban area. But I think what I wanted to point out is that it cuts both ways. Like here, we have an investment that's going to be made in the rural area where is this really the best use of precious TMP dollars? You know, and we're hearing from the local councillor that he believes that it's not, and that TMP money could go to a different project that might have a bigger impact. And to Councillor Johnson's point, I think what we're going to see in the TMP part 2 is that the modal share for or the rural transit bike mode share, I believe, is less than 1%. So, you know, is this really going to move the needle, and is this the best investment in these dollars? So I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kidd. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was basically sort of my second series of questions. So, you know, I have noticed that, and you know, having gone to the Rural Summit as well, you know, that we're having these sort of context-specific motions from, and it is absolutely within a councillor's purview to move a motion that suits their community. But I think what's coming up for me when I went to the Rural Summit and, you know, seeing some of the recommendations from that is that, you know, it is getting to be, in my view, about time that we start interrogating some of those policies that are citywide, and whether or not we might be able to you know, I mean, it is hard with things like road safety. Obviously, you want to put the money where, you know, the highest impacts of, you know, serious collisions and fatalities might be. But I do think it bears some scrutiny. And, you know, 23 years after amalgamation, we've, you know, harmonized this, what is it, 11 municipalities. Now trying to sort of pick apart how we might be able to do it. One of the solutions that came forward at the Rural Summit was, not to say that I like totally bring a motion to represent your community, but I am interested that, you know, the policy also supports these conversations so that we don't have to do it through motions all the time. It's probably a better use of everyone's time here and there. So in the Rural Summit, there was a recommendation, and I'm sure my colleagues will know better than I, but there was a recommendation about like separating the lists of things so that there was not competing
That's for
projects.
intersection,
Pardon me?
for intersections.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, for intersections. So separating the lists across transects. Is there an opportunity to sort of think that through with some of our other transportation policies or the prioritization lists so that we might be thinking about, you know, having things rise to the top amongst transects? You know, for example, one of the things I continue to be concerned about is the complete streets policy as it relates to the reconstruction of roads to a slower standard without the full renewal underneath. I'm afraid that my urban colleagues are going to try and scoop those dollars because they've got more people in their areas or perhaps more potential conflicts, but like the lack of investment in our neighborhoods in the outer urban ward, the frequency of, you know, non-fatal collisions is higher than the urban area. So those are the kinds of things that are coming up for us. How can we, is there, I'm sorry that I always sort of wander, but I think you're trying to understand, I think I'm getting it. So where can we do this and how do we do this? Maybe not this term, but when?
So I can start and maybe Vivi will have some thoughts to add as well to this conversation, because I think it's probably, from the way you are describing it, a bit broader than just the specific cycling projects. But I think certainly from an active transportation perspective, we do apply a geographic lens when we're looking at project priorities. Safety is in connectivity very high, but certainly there is also that consideration of a geographic lens that we apply, and our complete streets policy. And I think in the departmental response, it speaks to this. It's intended to consider the local context, and that does acknowledge that it looks different in different parts of the city, what we would do in those cases. So that's part of the background on the complete streets. But I think in terms of, the prioritization against that occurs where you're looking at downtown projects versus suburban projects versus rural projects, I think there's always opportunity to think of ways to do that better, but we certainly do already apply that geographic lens. And I would be, there's the geographic part to it, but there's also, as I said, the safety part of it. And we really do want to focus on where there is the greatest need. So there needs to be a balance, I think, would be my answer. And maybe Vivi will expand on that.
The greatest needs is not necessarily just the anticipated volume, but also, if the connection will complete a link, and if there are schools around. So those are some of the things that we look at. Excuse me, I have a cough drop. So it's broader than just a checklist of comparing. Like, we do look at it more broadly. We look at opportunities and we look at needs of the communities as well, geographically.
I certainly don't envy the prioritization process, but my concern remains that the geographic, like the transect sensitivity, the sort of equity versus equality in our policies, just never has a chance to trump many of these other things. And there might be great reasons for it, but we do create some unintended consequences. So I certainly don't envy your position, but when I'm in the community trying to talk about that type of stuff, and it sounds to me like when many of the others are, we struggle with that geography and the inequities that it presents. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Johnson, thank you very much. And I do understand, I really understand exactly where you're coming from. And I do want maybe this is a broader conversation, and I totally agree with you. And it's not to say this is not an rural issue, it's not an urban issue. You're right. The policy and Councillor Kidd just mentioned, and the purpose of the Rural Summit, it is to making sure, looking around, is those projects really make sense or doesn't make sense, and what is our community needs. Sometimes we put a policy, but we look at it from a broader perspective. Yeah, it makes sense to have it here, but we can't implement it here. And if we implement it here, it's gonna cost us more money and grief, and it's not good for the community. Who knows the community more than the councillors themselves? So yes, I totally understand, and I appreciate the conversation. And the Rural Summit has been, it's been very success to look at those issues. And some of these items that coming out of Rural Summit is not from us, because we're going out to the community, talking to our resident and understanding really what the issue. 2 weeks ago, we were discussing roundabout in Richmond, and now we're talking about bike lane. But this motion, it's not to remove bike lanes. This is, we want to make sure that people and the public understand this is not about that. This is about the Councillor Brown did great job talking to the community. And I want to give credit and kudos to staff, because they realize and they understand, okay, well, that making sense. And the conversation should happen before we invest the money and those dollars. And then taking those dollars, we're not taking them, we're investing them back into other community where those projects in the need and bothered. So I do appreciate the conversation. I want to thank you for all your question and concern. I want to thank staff also for understanding the need for our community. I also want to thank you, Councillor Devine, also for your question. And the committee here is to serve our rural residents, to making sure that there is a balance, and this balance in our city is always needed. So I want to thank staff and thank Councillor Brown for this hard work on these issues and bring them up to, that's why we have an agricultural welfare committee to address those issues. So I want to thank you all for that great work. And I'm sure the community will be very happy, well receiving those changes to the bike lane and to the road. So thank you for that. So we're gonna go to, first we have the technical amendment. Is that carried?
Carried.
And on the motion?
Carried.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We appreciate, and thank you, Vivi, also for answering some of those questions. We understand you've been presented at the Rural Summit and you've been great help to the rural councilors, helping us moving forward with that. That brings us to so we do actually talking about the Rural Summit. We have an additional item and a motion. Do we need to vote on them? Can we have a motion to add that motion on the agenda today? Okay.
Carried.
Thank you. And we have a motion actually from Councillor Clark Kelly, but also if you can read the motion, and then we can give a few minutes to every rural councillors at Heure. Then make it, before we vote on it, maybe we can just have a few, I'll give you each few minutes to say something about the Rural Summit. Please, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Be it resolved that staff be directed to report back to the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee in Q4 2025 with an update on implementation of identified recommendations during the 2024 Rural Summit, including work that has been completed to date and any outstanding works that need to be completed, as well as the outcomes that any changes made as part of the 2024 Rural Summit have had on rural Ottawa. And I will, first of all, take an opportunity to first of all, acknowledge that the Rural Summit was a success, I believe, and certainly highlighting some of the discussions that we've had here this morning on bike lanes and whatnot. I think it's the key takeaway for us as rural councillors, and I believe as the residents who attended, and you've heard it many, many times, and you've seen it play out at this table, and you will see it play out at this table again, I imagine, as well as the council table, is that sometimes the policies that are written in black and white don't work on the ground in particularly rural areas and villages. I think a great example for me, when Councillor Brown's talking, I think about the village of Carp and some of the policies that affect that in terms of grade separation over railway lines, because there might be a train coming 80 years from now, which would lead to the expropriation of some of the most iconic buildings in the village of Carp. That to me was an automatic thing that was implemented as a result of a citywide policy. So you can see countless examples of how that might not work, and really excited about the fact that we had a summit finally after 17 years. I want to thank all of the staff who took the time to come and listen, and the people who helped make it happen, including all of my fellow rural colleagues, resident working group, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark Kelly, for your participation and for your comment on this. We're gonna move to Councillor Lulaf.
Thanks, Chair. I'm heartened by what we experienced together this weekend. It was wonderful to see rural residents from across our beautiful city come together and discuss matters that mean a lot to
Councillor
them.
Lulaf, give me 1 second. We can't hear you in the gallery. I'd like to make sure that we have a volume up.
Everybody wants to hear that voice loudly and clearly.
How's
Second
that?
down.
Is that a little better?
Give
Is
us
that
one
better
second.
at all? Hi. I turned it up a little bit on my end, but I want to make sure that you can hear over there. Hello?
Oh, go ahead, Councillor Lulaf.
Is that better? Is that better now?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's better. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll put you all to sleep now. Yeah, I'm utterly pleased with what we experienced this weekend, bringing together rural residents from across this city to discuss the matters that are most important to them. I found it very interesting throughout this entire process with the resident working groups to see how many issues aligned with what we've been hearing in the East End. So, I mean, we had residents from Osgood and Carp and Manotick Village saying the same things as we were hearing in Cumberland, Navan, and across the East End too. And to hear that some of the solutions and some of the preoccupations were well aligned meant that we were put in a very good position to have good discussions and to work on these proposed solutions. I think that we recognize that the work is not done. I think Clark said it best in his opening remarks at the summit that this is not the culmination or the end of this process. This is just the beginning of it. And I know that it's going to cause some consternation in other areas of the city, that the rural area is receiving so much attention now. But let me be clear that this is not because the rural area is getting more. This is about remedying an attention deficit that has occurred since amalgamation. This is not about, giving more to the rural area, placing rural needs above the urban transect or the suburban transect for that matter. This is about ensuring that we are respecting and understanding the different context of rural life. We cannot conduct ourselves in the same way as larger municipalities across this country, because we're not Toronto, we're not Vancouver, or even Calgary or Edmonton or Halifax. Those are fairly homogeneous cities. We are an amalgamation of dozens of municipalities with very distinct and unique characteristics and unique challenges. And so that's what this is about. So I want to reassure my colleagues from other areas of the city that this isn't about trying to direct more funding or more attention to us as a rural area. We understand that we're in the minority. We are 5 of 25, but we also represent between 80 and 90% of the land mass of this city. And the context is so different. Rural businesses have a harder time trying to get through the planning process. We want to be able to help solve the housing crisis, but we deal with issues of not being able to have the sort of density that would be appropriate in a village because we're not serviced properly. There are very important contexts that need to be considered. And I hope that we can move forward throughout this process that has just begun in order to ensure that we have a level of parity across our city, that residents are able to avail themselves of services in the same way, regardless of where they live, which currently is not the case. So kudos to Clark for moving the first motion, to David and Catherine and George for getting behind it all together right away, to our resident working group who sat through very long meetings and came up with some really great ideas and had some great discussions and arguments with us. And to everybody that came out, thank you very much. And I have to give a shout out to the mayor, who's paid a great deal of attention to this inequity. And it's not trying to pit people against each other. It's trying to bring us all together finally after all these years. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Roloff. Councillor Kitt.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat everything that's already been said, but really great points. In a lot of ways, I think this was about catching up and doing some of the work now that hasn't been done since amalgamation, as Councillor Luloff was saying. And I think, something I've heard consistently over the last 4 years representing partially rural areas, that rural residents often don't see themselves in the conversations taking place at City Hall. They don't feel like the big city issues that we're tackling often have a rural perspective. So I think this rural summit was a great listening exercise, and we were able to go out into our communities and bring staff into our communities to say, we want to hear from you. And, often when we're doing consultation at the City of Ottawa, we're presenting something. We're saying here's a presentation. Let's look at this slide deck and then give us your feedback. But the way that we consulted for the Rural Summit was we just sat down and said, we want to hear from you. And then took all of that information and tried to find, where the common threads were, from Cumberland to Carp, from Greeley to Manotick. And so I think I want to commend everyone who was involved. The resident working group definitely played a huge role, but there was collaboration across the board from the members of RAVAC, city staff. I think we have a lot to be proud of in terms of the way that we consulted. And, even just the proximity to these conversations is sometimes a barrier for rural residents. It's not as easy to get down to City Hall to participate in our committee or council meetings, or to come forward as a delegation if you don't have a good internet connection in the rural area. So I think this was a needed exercise. As others have said, I think this is just the start, but really proud of the work that was done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitt. Councillor Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To follow along with the comments.
It's going to be short.
It will be short, as it always is, Chair. Short and sweet. We heard at the Rural Summit, but it bears repeating. We received more than 1,000 suggestions and ideas from the 450 residents that attended one of the 6 in-person ward workshops, more than 1,200 survey responses, dozens of hours put in every month by some members of the resident working group, city staff, ourselves. This isn't about tearing urban Ottawa down. It's about building rural Ottawa up. Councillor Luloff said it well. It's about bringing some of the attention, not because we want something from someone else. It's about bringing parity to the conversation. I know each of the members of ARAC have been on the cell phone a few times with one another where we lose signal, and we often joke we must be driving in the rural area of the city of Ottawa. And that's not something that perhaps our urban colleagues would experience. But when it takes me 40 minutes to drive across my ward, 40 minutes, you could drive across the urban part of Ottawa faster on some days. And so we need to make sure that when we're having these conversations, there's that rural lens. And we heard that Councillor Kit said it well. We didn't go to the rural area with a presentation. We asked for their feedback, and that is what they saw reflected at the Rural Summit. You know, almost a year-long process, 8 months of consultation, and certainly overdue after 17 years. So thank you to staff, the mayor's office and his team, and all of our teams, our staff. I think what we have now is an opportunity to move forward and address some of the issues that rural Ottawa has been facing for the last number of years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That was nice and very short. I appreciate your comment, but I do appreciate all my councillor colleagues' comment. And this is, I'm not going to repeat, I'm going to echo everything they said, because I totally agree with every comment was made today at ERAC. And this is, again, some of the challenges we do have in rural area. And if you look at it, we always talk about how 80% of the city of Ottawa is rural, but yet 20% live in it. But we want to make sure find that and strike that balance. And it's okay to have a collaboration between committee. It's okay, and strengthening ERA to making sure we address and find out what's happening throughout the city when we do policies, because we're not going to have, it's one city, but also one size doesn't fit all, and the cookie cutter doesn't work, right, Catherine? Just want to make sure I bring this up. But it's also to have a lens from our perspective and our resident. It's important to put out, and without pinning councillors against each other. I think the Rural Summit is a good exercise for our colleague. We have lots of new colleagues that they joined council this term, and it's important for them also to know and to see how the city of Ottawa put together from large geographically, urban, suburban, and rural. And I want to commend and thank my colleagues that they come to the Rural Summit, and they're here today also to observe and see how things are happening and to understand the issue we face. Councillor Brown mentioned, I have Remembrance Day ceremonies this weekend. We all have them in our community. It took me 45 minutes to go from Osgood to Vars. Those are kilometers and kilometers of road. And yet in my community itself, I have 10 villages. I'll tell you, none of the 10 villages have the same issue. Each village has a different unique characterism and different issues. So these are what we are trying to do in the Rural Summit, to address those issues and bring them to the table. And I don't think the collaboration with committees and collaboration with our colleague is very important. I do want to thank the resident group that they've been working with us. This has not happened in one day. It's been happening a year in the work, and we've done lots of meeting and public consultation. And without the collaboration and the participation of the rural residents, we won't be successful. That they came, and you know what? I'll tell you one thing. I've been in many committees and many public consultation and many community meetings. The people that they came to the Rural Summit, our rural resident, they were amazing. They came to address and bring their issue forward. There was nothing negative about it. Even though we had so many other groups from the city participated from all the city of Ottawa. And we had we had municipality, our neighboring municipality, mayors and councillors, that they join our Rural Summit to see what we're doing, to lead by example and look at how we're addressing issues and how we're moving them forward. So I want to thank everyone who participated, my colleagues and my resident, the rural resident that they participated and they submit their feedback. Also our resident group that they work hard, and our city staff. All our senior management was there, the city managers and her team. I know Vivi was there in my planning room and many other. They all were there participating and listening. It was a listening exercise. It's not like we came and we present something for them. What we've heard and what we delivered to them, it's what they told us. So I'm happy to see the conversation going, and this is not the end of it. We're going to keep moving forward with those, and that's why there is a motion coming today from Councillor Clark Kelly to keep the momentum going. I also want to thank our staff that they've done an amazing job, and the mayor's office and the mayor himself. The mayor is a commit to this term of council and to the rural resident that he's going to help and he's going to move forward, and he's participating on all these events, and he's putting all his effort to making sure some of the rural voice has been heard and brought to table. So I want to thank everyone, and I really appreciate me listening to me talking about that, because it's very important for all of us. And we do have a motion from Councillor Kelly. Is that carried?
Carried.
That's carried. Thank you very much. We have no inquiry. 11, we have no other business. And I'll just remind everyone, next Thursday, December 5th, will be our budget meeting. So prepare for some time for that. And can I have an adjournment, please? Carried.
Carried.
10:54. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy your day.